Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are diving into something really fascinating. We're going to unpack a highly provocative, passionately argued essay called Sprache, Language, Zaban by Tangsir Aksunkash. We're taking a deep, academic, but hopefully really engaging look at a text that fiercely challenges everything you might have been taught about language, religion, and cultural awakenings. Whether you're a total nerd for historical linguistics or just curious about alternative views of world history, we're going to map out the author's rather intense, unconventional arguments. And as always, my goal here isn't to take a side, right? I'm just here to impartially guide you through the source material so we can understand the architecture of these claims together. Okay, so here is our roadmap. We'll be looking at the fall of antiquity, the first Iranian Renaissance, Europe's linguistic rebirth, the corruption of language, modern academic decline, and finally, what the author calls the Second Renaissance. It's a massive, century-spanning journey from 800 AD to the present day, so let's get into it. Right, before we really get going, to understand this author's entire worldview, we absolutely have to start with this one core concept, Volksgeist. It's a term coined by the German philosopher Johann Gottfried Herder, and it basically translates to national spirit. The essay uses this idea as its philosophical backbone. It argues that a people's unique identity is totally inextricably linked to their native language and their history. According to the text, language isn't just a tool we use to order coffee, right? It is the absolute core of human identity and the very foundation of our moral values. The author argues that without a native language, a society literally loses its soul.
Section 1. The Fall of Antiquity, the Erasure of Greco-Roman Culture.
The source kicks things off with a massive historical claim. It asserts that universalizing religions, and it specifically names Christianity and Islam here, didn't just conquer new territories. They completely absorbed and overwrote indigenous cultures. The author argues that by imposing these universal doctrines, these religions actively erased unique national identities, local myths, and, crucially, native languages. According to the essay, this wasn't just a standard transition of historical power. It was the cultural decay and the tragic erasure of Greece and Rome, leaving their descendants in this sort of spiritual limbo.
Section 2. The First Iranian Renaissance, Preserving the Past. To keep us grounded, we're going to track a timeline of historical events from 800 AD all the way up to today, starting right at the beginning, 800 to 1200 AD. The author categorizes this period as the First Iranian Renaissance, which is a pretty unexpected central thesis. The text argues that long before Europe woke up, there was this profound, often completely overlooked cultural awakening happening over in the Middle East. The source states that following Arab and Turkish invasions, a group of incredibly defiant Persian scholars essentially went into survival mode. They endured literally centuries of silence to preserve ancient texts. And they didn't just save Persian writings. The essay claims they safeguarded the ancient knowledge of Rome and Greece, too. By resisting what the author terms foreign ideologies and fiercely preserving their language and history, these Persian polymaths effectively kept the flame alive. They set the stage for the global scientific and cultural rebirth that would follow centuries later.
Section 3. Europe's Linguistic Rebirth, the Awakening of Nations.
Jumping forward on our timeline to the 14th through 17th centuries. Now, traditional history usually frames the European Renaissance as primarily an artistic movement, right? Beautiful paintings, sculptures, that sort of thing. But our source text radically redefines it. The author argues this era was fundamentally a linguistic awakening, a direct continuation of the spirit preserved during that Iranian Renaissance we just talked about.
The author points to some absolute heavy hitters here, but not for their art. Dante Alighieri, who legitimized Italian, Martin Luther, who standardized German, William Tyndale, who essentially formed the core of modern English prose. The essay uses these figures to prove that true Renaissance thinkers totally rejected Universal Church Latin. Instead, they prioritized cultivating their distinct native vernaculars. Why? Because, as we learned from Herder's idea of Volksgeist, native language is the seed of national identity and common sense.
Section 4. The Corruption of Language, Shifting Meanings. Okay, this is where the author's argument gets really granular and honestly super interesting. The crucial point here is the claim that language was intentionally corrupted. Think about how shocking it is to consider the classical word idolum. Originally, it simply meant an image or a likeness. But under Christian usage, the text argues, it was entirely reframed into a false god or an object of forbidden worship. A completely neutral term was suddenly heavily moralized. Then there's peccatum. Back in classical Latin, this was just a fault.
a natural, everyday human mistake. But in Christian usage, it transforms into a sin, a severe moral offense against God. The author argues this linguistic reframing actually weaponized natural human behavior, making people way easier to manipulate by stripping away their logical understanding of the world. It's an incredibly potent shift, right? Moving from just making a mundane mistake to committing a literal spiritual crime.
And finally, wrap your head around saculum. Originally, it just meant an age or a generation, but it was shifted to mean the secular world, pitted directly against the sacred. The text asserts that by hiding speech behind dead languages like Latin and Greek, and by fundamentally altering these definitions, institutions destroyed the common sense and moral clarity of the people. According to the essay, when you don't even understand the true meaning of your own thoughts, you completely lose your grasp on human nature itself. Section 5. Modern Academic Decline, a Clash of Definitions. Pushing our timeline all the way forward, we finally land in the modern era. Here, the source transitions from historical analysis into a highly charged critique of modern Western academia today. The author claims modern universities have essentially completely lost the plot. The essay totally goes after modern historians here, specifically calling out Harvard historian James Hankins by name. It is a major clash of definitions. The author, Tankser, defines the Renaissance as a national and lingual awakening, grounded in human nature. Conversely, they accuse modern academia of pushing Latin elite humanism, framing the whole era merely around classical antiquity, elite education, and this transnational preference for Latin, which the author views as just another extension of religious control. The text doesn't mince words at all. It literally says, today, Western academia as a whole opposes the idea that Renaissance was about cultural and lingual awakening. Wow. So the author believes that modern universities are actually intentionally hiding true European history, preferring to align with narratives that suppress the power of native language and national identity. To sum up this massive critique of the modern academic landscape, the essay claims academics emphasize elite Latin over native tongues. It argues that modern critics frame history solely around oppression, exclusion, and power structures, which means they avoid any substantial debate about the ideas themselves. Furthermore, the text asserts they downplay humanist optimism and intellectual autonomy. Ultimately, the author says, they align with the exact same universalizing religious narratives the Renaissance originally fought against. Which brings us to our final section. Section 6, The Second Renaissance, a Call to Iran. Having heavily critiqued both historical and modern institutions, the author looks to the future, concluding that Iran is the natural candidate and sanctuary for a second Renaissance. The author argues that because of its incredibly rich linguistic roots, dating all the way back to that first Iranian Renaissance we talked about, and its historical tradition of resisting universalizing ideologies, modern Iranians have a unique opportunity. By embracing the Persian language and rejecting foreign ideologies, the text claims they can spark a brand new global awakening of common sense and human nature. All of this leaves us with one incredibly powerful question drawn directly from the logic of our source material. If a people's native language is the foundation of their identity and logic, what happens to a society when the meaning of its words is rewritten by outsiders? It's a deeply provocative concept, isn't it? It forces us to really examine the hidden relationship between the words we use every single day, the history we're taught, and the ideologies that quietly shape our world.